I'm pleased to have Marlon James joining me live this time in Studio Q. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So over the last week or so, we've been talking about a couple of big moments in music and in pop culture. So I'd love to get your thoughts on those. Let's start with a tweet of yours from Monday. It read, "I'm calling it. That was the best Grammy performance since Prince in 1985. Who are we talking about?
Kendrick.
Kendrick Lamar.
King Kendrick. Although my friend Scott, who used to write for Vibe, in fact, he came up with the name Vibe. He was like, "You sure?" I would say as fan as Ricky Martin at the Grammys. I'm like, yeah, that was pretty game changing too. But I'm calling it best since Prince. It's. I didn't expect him to be that theatrical.
Okay.
And I mean it in a great way. I am very skeptical when rappers perform live. It's one of the reasons why I kind of don't go to hip hop shows, because I just don't want to hear, yeah. I just don't want to hear that for 2 hours. But he's really turned into this fantastic performer. And one of the things that's really great about him is he always drops new stuff.
In his
performances.
Yeah.
He drops new stuff. He understands the dynamics of poetry, which I think is great. And I think the other thing I like about him, I think a lot of times when we praise rappers, we praise them for all non-rap qualities, which really annoys me when people, he's like a rock star. No, he's not a rock star. He's a rapper. And I like that. That the best things about him is still flow and invention and wit and but still he's not trying to be a rock star, and I like that.
What do you think is resonating about his music right now? I mean, he was up for 11 Grammys, which is the second most ever to Thriller by Michael Jackson. He took home 5, and this is an experimental.
He was robbed. Anyway.
Well, tell me your thoughts on that first of all.
Well, I do think he was robbed. I think
of Album of the Year.
Album of the Year, but this is the second time he's robbed of Album of the Year. He did the best album that year too. And but it's sort of this kind of we put the rap guy in. I'm not going to call it a rap ghetto because rap is the biggest music. If it's a ghetto, it's one. The world is a ghetto. But I think it's but nobody's surprised though. I mean, the thing about the Grammys is that they always have fantastic performances and disappointing awards. Prince didn't win for Purple Rain.
I think Lionel Richie won that.
Yeah. Although the album has aged well.
Yeah.
But I want to answer the first part of your question, but I forgot what it was.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it strikes me that this is such an experimental album, but it's resonating.
It's resonating
right now.
One reason why it's resonating is that you can't dismiss it. For example, if anybody who's followed me on Facebook knows I had a 1-year-long struggle with this record. Some of the messages, there are times I think it slipped into bootstrapism. There are times when I thought, I couldn't understand it musically.
Okay.
It's funny. I wrestled with it for the whole year because again, it's that, and I think he deliberately does that so that because he's complicated.
He's not just preaching to the choir.
No. And I actually think hearing that would be a compliment to him. That I couldn't dismiss it, but I was fighting with it for a good part of it. And I literally was on a plane like 32,000 feet in the air, and it all made sense to me.
What do you see as a writer in his story, in the story he's telling?
The thing I said before, complication. That it's funny because I have an article coming out about my huge struggle with Black of the Berry.
Well, first of all, what's your struggle with that song? What are your critiques of that song?
Because I disagree with him when he says he's a hypocrite. I think you're not a hypocrite. I think there's a difference between contradiction and hypocrisy. Listen to Rage Against the Machine. There's a difference between contradiction and hypocrisy. You can have two opposing views at the same time. You can be totally in love with somebody and want to see them all the time, but you also want your private space and you want both right now. It's just a dialectical tension. It's not hypocrisy. And also I think, there are parts of it, particularly the third verse, is always that, man, you had me till you got to that third verse. As like, Zulu and Xhosa go to war because they're nations going to war. Nobody says, France and England in Battle of Waterloo is like gangsters. And the thing I realize about that song is I think the only person he's really trying to pull up is himself. His response when he said, you have to know me where I'm coming from. And this is the thing I realized with that song, because I thought that was his big global statement. It's actually his most private song on the whole album.
Interesting.
And that's how I got to sort of I kind of accept it. I still disagree with it.
So you thought initially he was telling the black community, pull
Right.
yourself up by your bootstraps, and
Yeah.
then you realized he was speaking to himself.
I think, yeah. And I think some statements he made before as well about the Michael Brown shooting and then say, black people need to look within. And I'm like, those two have nothing to do with each other. And I think that also influenced how I thought about it. But then, I realized, the only person he's pulling up in that song is himself.
The other thing we've been talking about a lot on the show is Beyonce's song/performance/video formation. I can't repeat your Facebook reaction on air, but what do you like so much?
But it was a positive NSFW reaction.
Yeah, what do you like so much about the video?
Well, one thing I like about it is a lot of black people think it's not black enough, and a lot of non-black people think it's too black, which means she's about right. What I like about it is it's just this celebration of quote unquote unacceptable blackness. It's a celebration of hair weave. It's a celebration of ratchet. It's a celebration of down south. It's not this sort of performance of elegance for white people kind of blackness. And I think that's one of the reasons why, for example, black intellectuals have been really trying to rip it apart. Everybody keeps saying, well, have you heard the lyrics? The lyrics don't match the video. I'm like, Runaway Train by Soul Asylum doesn't match the video.
We had a panel, and we had a panel about that song. And one of the panelists pointed out, I think quite acutely, that you have to analyze each part of it. There's the song, there's the video, there's the Super Bowl performance.
Right.
They're different.
They're different. They all pull on some on the same things, but they're different. This idea that, for example, that Beyonce is trying to tarnish the image of the Black Panthers. No, J. Edgar Hoover tried to tarnish the image of the Black Panthers. Beyonce is insulting blackness. No, David Duke is insulting blackness. It's just a sort of, it's just a straight up. It actually, and I said this, it reminds me of Missy Elliott songs, where Missy Elliott will talk about 15 different ideas at once.
Talk about sexuality, talk about commerce, talk about culture.
Talk about culture and still insist you still don't get to shoot me. Even if I want to talk about Red Lobster.
One thing that strikes me when I think about this song/video/performance is I feel like the media has framed it as radical. And I'm not sure if I agree with that term, because to me, radical implies a level of risk that I'm not sure I see. That's the only thing. I like the video, and I agree with your analysis to a great extent. It's curious to me that I see that term radical applied so often, because to me it implies a level of risk, and I don't know if I see that kind of risk going on.
Well, I mean, radical is never a term anybody calls themselves. It's a term sort of bestowed or dumped on you, and I think it's the reaction that it's radical. I will say this though, I think that and Kendrick's King Kunta video is this sort of celebration of blackness. One of the things I think that's really interesting, and I think it's unprecedented actually, is these black artists, as they're getting bigger, are actually getting blacker.
That is unusual.
That is unusual. Usually this is a part where you start to be more mainstream, that horrible word. And I think that, I mean, and to an extent it is sort of, it's a mainstream song with Big Frida is to me pretty radical.
It's a sign of the moment as well. And in terms of how the mainstream itself has shifted. Yeah,
because the other thing about Formation, people forget, is also how queer it is.
Absolutely.
With Miss Maya and Big Frida, and even some of the dancing in the front, it's also celebrating black queerness, which is definitely radical for the black community.
Absolutely. So another complicating factor, I think, with Formation is the fact that Beyonce doesn't say much outside of her music, outside of her videos.
Yeah, neither does Prince.
That's true.
And I actually...
But now it's a different time.
Now it's a different time, but I think, I think she's an artist. And I think we run into trouble when we're trying to turn our artists into activists or message senders, because I get that as well. I gave a speech. I gave a speech at the University of West Indies this time Friday gone, and a friend of mine was genuinely distraught that I didn't get more political and talked more about gay rights and all of this stuff. They got genuinely distraught.
A lot of pressure now.
Yeah, that I didn't sort of stand up and speak, to all these issues. And I'm like, I don't think that's my job.
I don't know how artists are to manage that burden now because of social media and everything. There is this expectation, at least that you're going to be involved on social media and that you're going to be yourself on social media.
But also that you should make a big show of you being involved. Prince has been helping out schools since the late 70s. I don't think he's ever had a press conference talking about it, but he's been doing it since the late 70s. I've even read a think piece talking about how they don't respect that Beyonce is a quiet donor. That you should make a big deal about these things and show how she's doing that. She can do what she damn well wants. But I think this idea of performance, of activism, I've never really respected, because sometimes it's just performance.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was like, that's great that you're talking all so loud about it, but what are you actually doing? And I'm not knocking talking. I think we need our rabble-rousers and we need people to bring attention to issues. But I think sometimes because we're so lacking in those figures, we think anybody with a mic in front of them, here are 15 million issues you need to talk about, or you're not being black enough.
Tell me about your experience with this platform that you have now. I mean, we've been talking about some of your Facebook posts and your tweets, and I have to say you're excellent in short form as well as long form. I love this Oscars So White hashtag that you said on Twitter. Hashtag Oscars So White that the bear in Revenant would have snagged a nomination if she were polar. What's it like for you having this platform?
I don't think about it much.
Yeah.
Every now and then I realize that anything I seem to put out there makes some newspaper somewhere. There's this hilarious one in Wall Street Journal called A Brief History of Marlon James's Journey Through an Indian Airport. And that was something. I'm 45 years old. I don't scare that easy. I think I've always spoken my mind. I got that from my mom. Even when we wish our mothers weren't, my mom wasn't so blunt. She'd be the only person like, yeah, did this, yeah, but I can tell you didn't brush your teeth. And there's everybody around me because that's just what she is, and I pick up that bluntness from her. To me, as long as I'm not lying. As long as I'm not being dishonest, whether dishonest, intellectual dishonest, or so on, I mean, anything is fair game. But also, I actually never thought of myself as like an outspoken person. I just, it's something I want to talk about, and I want to talk about it.
To a great extent, writing has given you this platform and the success of this latest novel in particular. I was struck by reading that you said you were haunted by this story. And I was curious if you have memories of releasing this story out of you, in particular the second half that took some time. Do you have memories of that experience of letting go of this story that you were haunted by?
I remember being terrified by it. I remember being scared. I don't know what it is really, but me being scared of something never really stopped me from doing it. And it's weird talking about it because then people think, oh, you developed the courage. No, I'm still pretty scared. But I think, I think as a writer, certainly, that at some point, everything, or at least as much as you can that's in your head, should come down on the page. And I actually can deal with it there. I don't have to keep swirling these things around in my head. One of the things about that book was me coming to terms with the 70s that my parents lived through, because I didn't live through that 70s. I was a kid. And I think there's certainly an assumption that a kid in the 70s, someone was like some political prisoner in the 70s. I'm like, no, I was still eating cornflakes and watching Sesame Street.
And that's a strange experience to look back on.
It is
knowing
strange.
that everything was going on and you were watching cartoons.
Yeah, but isn't that how it is, though? I think any kid, until you know different things, his world is a world of wonder. And to realize just how precarious everything was, how dangerous everything was, how we nearly came into losing a lot of really important things. But also, because this is something we take for granted, for example, my generation takes reggae's dominance for granted. Back then, it was just burgeoning. Back then, we're swapping out one culture for another. We have this emerging black middle class, music forms and literature that sounds like the way Jamaicans sound when they open them out. It was a really it also was pretty new and revolutionary and vital. It wasn't all just guns and violence.
How did it feel to start to look at that on the page?
Is this weird kind of nostalgia for something I didn't experience? Which I think is what happens when you watch anything about the 70s. There's certainly a part of me that I'm like, yeah, I was. Then I go, but I didn't know anything about that. It's so it's a combination of total strangeness and total familiarity.
And your novel has been optioned by HBO?
Mm-hmm.
You excited about that?
I am super excited about it. I actually wrote the script.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it's still too early to say anything. Nothing is a given in Hollywood. Certainly not in TV, but it's so far it's exciting, and it will be interesting because that era has been covered. Some of those people have been covered. Some of the stories we've seen: Cold War, we've seen spies, we've seen what a sort of global imperialism does to developing countries, but I don't think we've seen it from that country's side.
What's it been like so far seeing the television film world versus the publishing world?
Oh my God. I say anything now, I won't be invited back to either world. It's, I think they're very similar in lots of ways, good ways and bad ways. In one good way, I think it's too easy to demonize either industry. I think they're really I think at the end of the day, they're just looking for compelling stories. And whatever shape or form that might take. And I think it's nowhere as cynical as people think. That said, they could look into some more diversity, seriously.
Well, you've been outspoken about that. You made some comments about an essay or an article rather called On Pandering. You made some remarks that the more successful writers tend to pander to white women. Expand on that for us. What did you mean by that?
Well, firstly, I meant the idea of a white woman. I didn't mean, and because the funny thing is when white women attack me on this or debate me on this, I go, but I can show you how they make white women pander to white women. It's for example, almost any writer of color can tell you the discussion about the book cover. What is it? We need like a, reasonably attractive black woman looking askance out the window, maybe her hand on her chin. There are no women in this book, but that's what's going to be the cover. Who is that pandering to? A friend of mine had a novel, and she's a white woman actually, had a novel called Being Polite to Hitler, and they changed it to In the Garden. Who's that pandering to?
They changed the title.
Yeah. An Asian American friend of mine being told to take the Asian part over their mixed race character. It's I personally don't think this white woman exists that they're pandering to, but I don't think it changes this idea, this sort of selling your own audience short. This I face it all the time. What my second novel, a British publisher asked me if I'd rewrite the whole thing in distance third person. She basically wanted me to turn it into Jane Austen with whipped Negroes. So wow. Who is that pandering to? That is a pander. And I think that Which is not to say this audience exists, but I think it's something that we need to talk about and talk seriously about, because somebody out there is buying Junot Diaz. It's not just Dominicans buying Junot Diaz. Certainly there's an audience for this work, but there is still, I think, a certain cynicism. It's in film too. A certain cynicism. Sometimes I think, for example, the black guy in the movie is only there to say, "Oh, hell no." That's his role.
Well, what kind of pushback have you gotten to those remarks? Because in the publishing world, that's a big deal, saying something like that.
There has been some of it is not, is not really a pushback. It's just people making a big noise. I know somebody who had a whole sort of Facebook thread, and it was just going on until one person said, "There's no writer of color on your thread." And they shut it down. So a lot of people, I realize, are having an argument, and the argument can go only so far until they ask a friend of color what do they think. So they try to skip that. There was a think piece, I think, in New Republic that was trying to paint me as sexist. But in order to make the sexist point, they had to ignore the near 500 women of color who like the status. That's a big miss you're making in order to make a point about sexism. You're by saying that, you're saying these 400, 500 women of color are idiots, or they're talking about something that isn't there, and that's not. I think it's, and then following up that whole expose in Salon a few weeks ago, going, "Oh yeah, it's 84% white and female."
In terms of the audience?
No, in terms of the industry.
In the industry, okay.
I'm sure the counter would be, but to say that because we're here, that results in a racial bias is unfair. I'm like, are you sure about that?
Well, I'd imagine some of the pushback would be that women, including white women, have been on the margins of power for a long time. So this dominance of the literary world is a kind of victory. I'd imagine that would be.
Well, if it's a kind of victory, that's great, but what are you doing with it? Because if victory just means you're perpetuating the problems that were there before, then I'm not sure who won. If the upcoming black female writer is still having that discussion about you need a cover that's more accessible to a mainstream audience, who won? I think it's something. I think it's something we need to talk about. I don't think the issue is going away. I think we sometimes pay lip service to diversity and to different stories, and don't realize sometimes they just I think, and I can't say writers of color. I don't know every writer of color, but I think sometimes it even becomes this ingrained thing, like. Do I do this? Do I have
completely unconscious process?
Right. Do I have dialect, or do I insert a white character so white readers can relate? What do we do with that? It's we see it in film as well. You want to do a film about Africa? Sure, but where's the sympathetic white guy? Or I'm not funding your film. So it's still there, and it's there in literature. We're like. The type of sort of discussions that like black writers will have when we get together because it's off the air, and it's like, we're gonna have to put in a white character. We're gonna have to do this.
But now in 2016, those conversations are being broadcast,
and they should be.
Yeah,
they should be, and people should be a little uncomfortable for a little bit, because I think there are 1,000 ways to tell a story, and I think there are a lot. This idea that we should relate to characters is a very late 20th century thing that makes actually no sense. I'm pretty sure nobody has ever related to Captain Ahab in Moby Dick, and if you do, you've got issues. So nobody's ever related to them. I'm pretty sure nobody's ever related to Samson in the Bible. Mm-hmm. It's not a measure of what makes a compelling, readable story. It's a horrible standard to judge anything by.
A writer here at the CBC noted that 2015 was a big year for you, big year for Ta-Nehisi Coates. Here in Canada, Andre Alexis won the Giller Prize, one of our biggest prizes here. A big year for black writers. Mm-hmm. What's your take on what transpired last year in the literary world?
I don't know. because I mean, there are a lot of black female writers who did some stunning stuff, and Roxane Gay, swung out the box with 2 books. Um, I don't know. I think it may be too much to say. I think it's too glib to say it's a coincidence because we're also writing. All 3 of us are writing very uneasy books.
And different books.
And different books, but they would be labeled by some, at least 1 or 2 sectors of the population as difficult, for whatever reason. And I think they are uncompromising books, and I think that's new. It's not new. We've always had a rich tradition of that, but I think that I actually think people are I think those books, certainly Ta-Nehisi's book, is proof that people are open to stories.
The acceptance is new.
Yeah. The acceptance and the willingness to read a story where you're not going to see yourself in it. Because I really hope that's a phase we're going to outgrow. Because it's getting in the way of empathy, for one. Empathy is not, relatability has nothing to do with empathy. Relatability, you're asking the piece of art to do the work. And empathy, you do the work.
I think it's a massive shift, and I think it's a quick shift. It surprised me how fast that's happened.
Yeah, that is. I guess I figured it would work that way. That would be plodding along for decades and then instant shift, which is kind of how everything is happening. I think what we still should be skeptical, because instant doesn't mean it's long lasting. We've had phases like this before, which we think is a period of open-mindedness when it was just a period of negrophilia. We've had it before. Are we going to still have sustained stories? I want to see who are the next set of essayists who are going to get book deals after Ta-Nehisi. So we don't end up being, again, this sort of flash in the pan, because we've been there before.
What do you think the key is to that kind of lasting change?
One thing never letting the issue die, I think. More people of color in this industry. And which is, again, is not to say that you have to put a black person in publishing to get black writers. No, not necessarily. But let's not kid ourselves either. It certainly helps. It certainly helps. I think it allows for more openness. I think what am I saying? That if we continue to sort of recognize these books, one of the things that, for example, that always sort of muted this type of progression in the past is we'd see one book from a writer and then we never hear anything else about any other writer, him or any other writer in that sort of vanguard. I think sometimes we tend to slot black writers or Asian writers into each slot. You can only be the black middle class person. If another black middle class person comes up, they're in competition. They're not in competition. There is space for a wider voice. We're not here to pick up all these slots.
So now that we have awareness of these sorts of things, we can press those issues. I
think so, and I think we don't underestimate the whole thing about awareness. It's I don't think we were as aware before because we just didn't have the tools.
Yeah.
I think now, you can put something on your Tumblr, and even Tumblr is old. So.
Before I let you go, everyone is excited about this African Game of Thrones idea. I got to get a little bit of.
I'm trying to remember if that was if I called it that. I might have called it that. I'm writing a fantasy novel, set in Africa in the 1100s, 1000s, 1100s, maybe the 900s.
I'd imagine that's a lot of fun.
It is a lot of fun, but it's also really, really tedious, and I've been researching it for a year and a half, and I'm still not done yet.
Is the research phase fun for you though?
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, but it's also a big procrastination tool for me. I will do it forever to not write, because I know I write books, but I love to not write. It's any excuse to not do it, and research is a great one.
Thanks so much for being with me here, Marlon.
Thanks for having me.